Deeper than music radio. Behind every great song is a greater story.
Deeper than music. The core of you, the fans, the truth. It's deeper than music, deeper than music. Simply the truth is the latest, the newest. It's deeper than music, deeper than music. The core of you, the fans, the truth. It's deeper than music, deeper than music. Simply the truth is the latest, the newest. It's deeper than music, deeper than music.
What up, what up, what up? Deeper Than Music Radio, behind every great song is an even greater story. Like to say what's up to everybody listening to us. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in this part of the world, and listening to all the great platforms that we're podcasting on. Today we have a very special treat. I'd like to give a shout out to all my 80s and 90s Nintendo maniacs and all my gamer friends out there. Today we have a very special guest. I mean, I used to watch his show on Nickelodeon religiously. Before we bring him on, I just want to give you a little bit about Phil Moore. He's most known for his Nickelodeon show, Nick Arcade. He was actually born and raised in one of my favorite states. Shout out to Maryland, from Baltimore. Not only was he on Nick Arcade, he's also a stand-up comedian. And before becoming the host of Nick Arcade, he was a technician in Orlando, Florida. And he was also the comedian for the warmer for the show Remote Control. I hope you guys remember that show that was on MTV. He was also on You're On, Figure It Out. And he was on the very first episode of All That. He also appeared in Rosewood, which we'll talk about because I do remember his character. He had a memorable character in that role. He was in Aqua Kids, and now he's producing and writing for variety shows such as E! Entertainment, BET, Style Network, G4, and HDTV. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome special guest Phil Moore here on Deeper Than Music Radio. Phil,
hey,
how you
what's
doing?
up, Mark? How you doing, man?
Doing pretty good, man.
That was a nice little intro right there.
I'm glad you liked it, man.
Man, I hope my mother's listening so she know I ain't fooling around.
Oh man,
what you doing now? What did you hear, Mark's podcast, Mom? Yeah.
Yeah, man. I used to, Nick Arcade was one of my staples. I was like heavy into Nintendo, heavy into the 8-bit, the 16-bit era. We talking like TurboGrafx 16, Genesis.
Right.
Man,
right.
I didn't realize you was also a stand-up comedian, and you were also on remote Control, which is weird. One of my weird memories, I actually rented that video game.
Well, see, look, Remote Control, I like to call that's the reason why I do what I do. I mean, I was doing stand-up comedy. That's what, I went to school, wanted to do one thing, and all of a sudden had this weird career shift, and just out of the blue got into entertainment, and I got into doing stand-up. But it was just stand up, and I loved it. Going to clubs, doing the bit. I even did a couple of I was on the Showtime, had a comedy show called the Showtime Comedy Club Network. I did a few things. It was really, really cool. But at that particular time, the transition for me was when I was about to become a dad. At the time, I was married, and my wife was expecting our first child. And a stand-up comic's life is a life on the road, and all of a sudden I had to figure out a way to not be on the road, but still work and try to keep it in my field. So, they used to do MTV Spring Break in Florida, and they were going to be shooting MTV Spring Break down in Florida. And at that time, there was this game show called Remote Control, hosted by the late great Ken Ober. It had her. I mean, it was a fun show. I was a fan of the show. But when they were shooting in Florida, instead of flying down all of the people that worked on the show, they tried to minimize the cost of travel and expenses by finding some local people to do various jobs. And so I ended up, fortunately, hooking up and getting that job. An audience warm-up is like doing stand-up comedy, except I don't have to leave town. So I was able to be home, and I could still do my job. But that's what got my feet wet in working for television. I had never worked on television before, other than, and even when I said the Showtime special, that's working on TV, but it's not. There are cameras around, But from my perspective, I'm just doing another stand-up day. You walk up, microphones on the stage, brick wall behind you, you do your stuff. That's normal. Like working in the TV environment, cameras, lights, director, stage manager. I'd never done that before, but that was like I said, that's what got me involved in television. So that was kind of like an interesting transition. I went from remote control to the new Mickey Mouse Club.
Oh, wow. Oh, you was in the new Mickey Mouse Club? I didn't realize that.
No. I wasn't in it. You never saw me. I did the audience warm-up for that.
Oh, okay, okay.
They have a live studio audience, and so the person there that was that, and so that was the transition from working with adults and working in the kids. Because remote control, spring break crowd, it was a studio audience. But when I went from that show to the new Mickey Mouse Club, with Fred Newman, it was when they had the party on there right before JT came on.
Oh wow! You just mentioned the party.
That
group.
I was with the party, man. I was there with the party. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, but that was also talking about another transition. That's what got me. Now I'm involved in television, and then I go from working in television with adults to working in television with kids. And that was, again, that's how that snowball sort of evolved, started rolling down the hill.
So basically you were in Orlando when everything like Nickelodeon Studios, Disney, so you were there during all that explosion, because I remember Orlando was like the mecca for all the Nickelodeon shows. Right.
That was when it was right before it was like, you're right. Orlando became this thing. They were trying to be Hollywood East. And it was the booming place to start doing TV shows. So the first studio that opened was the Disney MGM studios for production. I think now it's called Hollywood something else, but it's part of their, one of their theme parks. But it was open just for real television production. It wasn't open yet for tourists to come there and do stuff. And then shortly after it, Universal Studios Orlando opened. Same deal. It wasn't open to the public yet, but their studios were up and running. And, of course, I don't know the dealings of like big wigs and big corporations. Unbeknownst to me, Nickelodeon had made a deal to start doing all of their shows down there. And it was kind of the same thing. You got this big production company coming down from New York. And before they start moving everybody down, they stop and go, well, who's here already? That's kind of decent. So it was one of those right place, right times, man. Right place, right time. I went from, like I said, remote control, then Mickey Mouse Club, and then I did Let's Make a Deal. I was the audience warm-up for Let's Make a Deal. They brought it back over at Disney on one of their sound stages. And then, while I was doing all of this, I started doing auditions, and Nick Arcade was the first TV in front of the camera ever. That was crazy.
Wow. And did you, is being a host, is it more difficult than being a comedian? Because I feel like being a comedian is hard. You got timing. It's got to be the right joke,
they always say like, for me, I found that, I don't know. That's a really good question. Oh my gosh. You know what, Mark? Ding, 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 ding. I have been interviewed so many times over the last 25 years. It's kind of hard to come up with a question that no one's ever asked me. That is a question that no one's ever asked me. I gotta think about that, man. You could. I think knowing what I know and having done what I've done, I think being a comedian is harder.
Okay.
Yeah, it is harder because a host, all you have to do is just say the words, and it doesn't really matter what the reaction is. But for a lot of hosts, they're reading a teleprompter, so it's not even their responsibility for the content, and they don't have any stake in the content. But when it's a comedians are up there, they're standing up there like full frontal. You know what I mean? They're bearing everything. And everything they talk about is coming from them. And they're putting it out there. And it's all for the purpose of soliciting a certain response. So, being a stand-up was harder. Definitely harder, yeah.
And then I also see, prior to all of this, you were a computer technician. Because I want to ask, during the audition, did they ask about your video game savvy? Did you come into it heavily into video games?
No. The thing about back in the day, is for Nick Arcade. Nick Arcade, I got to give props right here on air to the creators of the show, James Bethea and Karim Metef, because there's a lot of stuff that we now take totally for granted that was invented for Nick Arcade.
Okay.
So much time and so much effort and so much talent and energy was putting into how to do the video zone stuff. The video game stuff.
Yeah.
You
Okay,
know,
I remember the video zone stuff.
I mean, we all do this now. We got Oculus Rift, we got the Wii, we got the all the cameras on the TV. You can do it on apps now where it looks like you're inside of a game. And and for anybody who's like, under the age of 25, they might take it for granted as just another day. But this stuff didn't exist, and yet we were able to pull this off. And so a lot of the energy and effort went into getting that to work. The video game part of it, they kind of kept that on automatic pilot. I mean, there were some cool guys and a couple of really cool women that worked on what games to choose, what they thought would be difficult for the players to play, deciding what the levels would be to beat the game wizard, all of that stuff. But they kind of said, look, if a kid is on the show, then hopefully they've picked up a controller or they've been to an arcade. And although it wasn't a huge prerequisite for getting the job, they did ask me. And at that time, I had a Nintendo at home, the 8-bit one, and I played video games. I was that guy that was like always, popping into Chuck E. Cheese's. Back in the day, there was Showbiz Pizza. Remember Discovery Zone? Remember Discovery DZs?
Okay, I remember.
There were video games, those things all the time. So that was about it. That's all you had to be. Because the big thing that everyone, the network executives, the executive producers, they were all concerned about, can we make this virtual reality thing work in an era in which it didn't exist? So not really. They weren't really big on like, are you big at video games? What's your video game savvy? However, this is where my job got a whole lot of fun. Once I got the job, once I, landed the role and we started getting into stuff, a lot of people will look at old episodes and they will yell at the screen because I'm calling things wrong or I'm not pronouncing names correctly. I wish I could go back in time and tell myself, it's Dr. Robotnik, not Robonek.
Oh yeah.
But because of that, just to get familiar with some of the terminology and some of the characters, part of my job, part of my homework after going to work all day was to go home with like 7 or 8 cartridges and play games. On the weekends, my homework job was to play games. So like they already shipped me a Sega Genesis, a Nintendo 64. They said, all the systems that were out at the time. I had 5 different video gaming systems in my house. And on the weekends, part of my job was just to play games so that I could get familiar with, okay, this person is called blah, blah, blah. Oh, and he's a such. Oh, the main boss does this, so I could be familiar with it a little more.
Yeah. And I didn't realize.
That's how I got my education on some of the games. But it all came after the fact. With getting the job, the biggest thing that they were interested in, I didn't know this myself until 20 years later. And I'm in New York City and I'm hanging out, having, at a cafe with the 2 guys that created the show. Mm-hmm. And now we're all grown up. We're all old men. We're sitting around, scratching our stomachs and going. And so finally I asked them, now that I'm in the producing, I went, hey guys, I've been in a situation where I had to audition people when, there's a lot of factors that go through my mind as to choose someone. And I asked them for the first time, like, what made you choose me? Because again, you didn't ask about, you weren't that big on my video game savvy. What was it? And they said, well, the day that I came in for the final screen test, we did it on the set of Get the Picture. And so that everybody now, when they see the Get the Picture set and another guy hosting Nick Arcade, don't sit up there and at me going, hey, somebody else did the show first. No, that's a test pilot. And they got one of the producers of Nick Arcade to play the role of host. They wanted to see how it would look on camera. They wanted to see how the going from, round 1 to round 2, how that would look. And instead of investing a lot of money in building the set, they actually did it on the set of a show called Get the Picture, hosted by my good friend Michael Malley, who went on to do Guts. But I digress. But I asked him, so what was the deal, man? What was the deal that, why me? And I said, was I that good? Was I better than? Because it was down to 2 people, me and someone else. I don't know who that person is. I didn't ask. So I kind of didn't want to know. But they said the biggest difference for them was we were both really equal in almost everything. Almost everything. He said they were having a hard time deciding, while we're still in the midst of doing this, audition. Oh my gosh, this is there's nothing determining what decision they should make. But they said the one thing that made the difference for them was in between an audition, not an audition, in between a screen test, you're in there longer. An audition, you're in there, you read your lines, you go out. But when you're in there for a screen test, you've made it through multiple auditions and callbacks. So they're taking time. There's a full crew there. They're shooting. They've got lighting and all that stuff. They actually paid some kids to come in to be the contestants for this, mock run through. Wow. And they said the biggest difference was whenever we stopped for a break to change a battery, to go and, fix a cable, to take a look at tape, whatever it was they needed to do technically. Whenever we stopped for a break, they said the other person would stand at the podium, like you should do, and take a look at the cards where we have our little cheat notes, which we all should have, to make sure to go over our lines, to make sure we got the rules correct, those points, puzzles, pop quizzes, and prizes. We got to go, read. We're going over this during this downtime so that when we're ready to go, it's fresh in our mind.
Yeah.
That's what the other guy did. They said, but every time we would stop for a break, you would step from behind the podium and go hang out with the kids.
Oh, wow.
And they said, we noticed that every time. It's it didn't matter if you got the line right. It didn't matter to you if you remembered the exact wording. You just wanted to make sure that you and those kids were having fun together. And he said, that's what they wanted. They wanted somebody who would reach through to the screen, and even if the kids looked like they were having a bad time, you could tell that the host was, and he was trying to reach through that screen to the audience to make sure that they were too. And I was like, wow. So it wasn't anything I did. He goes, no, there was nothing that they filmed. He said, nothing that you filmed made a difference because you and the other guy were neck and neck. It was only the stuff that they did when they weren't filming that made the difference. I thought, what's the irony of that,
But it makes sense because, your audience was, in fact, kids, and you had to have that connection.
Right.
Man, that's
right.
pretty, and it was natural.
It was natural. I never thought about it. It was the kind of thing, I'm that person where when somebody when any of my cousins have a new baby, Uncle Phil is over, yeah, so I'm there, I naturally love kids. That's why I had a great time doing the audience warm for the Mickey Mouse Club. It was just really cool. And it wasn't, like I said, wasn't anything contrived. I don't talk down to kids. I just go over and I just go over and hang. And that's all. I could tell that they were nervous. So I wanted to make sure they would feel okay. Cause even if you got somebody and like a kid and their job is to pretend to be a contestant, but they're a little nervous too, mm-hmm. It's gonna affect their performance. So I'm like, I just want to make sure they were feeling good and that we were all just having a good time. Whatever happens, happens. They made their $50 for the day, and if I didn't get the job, maybe they'll remember me for another thing. That's how that was the attitude I had, So but I didn't realize. Like I said, I never stopped and said, "Now go talk to the kids." But that's what they noticed. They said every time we had a break, you would go over and talk to the kids.
Yeah. And so then you get this job and it opens up more doors for you because I know like Nick Arcade had this run and you still stayed within, hosting. You were a panelist for, actually you had a hidden camera show called You're Out.
You're On.
Oh, you're on. Yeah, you're right. You're on.
Yeah. Well, that was at the end of the run. Let me tell you the thing that is seriously cool. And this is going to sound... People listening to this, y'all going to think, oh, this is cliche. We heard this before. Are you trying to do Fast and Furious? Back in the 90s, that decade from 1990 to the year 2000, people refer to it as Nickelodeon's golden age. Yeah. It was something really spectacular that I've never seen before, you know? And they were really supportive. They had your back. And if you did a thing and that thing was done, they had your back if they felt like what you were doing was good and they enjoyed the work that you presented to them. So they would not forget you. And so they would find things to do for you in between, you know, stuff, especially at Orlando. Like there's a lot of other shows that shot on location, you know, some of the shows like, Salute Your Shorts and Wild and Crazy Kids and,
Like, Hey Dude.
Hey Dude. Right. They all shot on location at different places. And so the people at the main offices, you know, they weren't as connected with those people because they were shooting all over the place. But Orlando was a hub, man. That was like, you know, the headquarters, man. That was like the Batman's watchtower, you know? And so you were better connected with the individuals. So you really got to know the executives on a more personal level. And so because they could get to know you, they could see potential in keeping you around, you know, if they wanted to. So yeah, they, the cool thing about Figure It Out, when Figure It Out rolled up, before Figure It Out, I should say, we were doing stuff like, Nick Takes Over Your Schools.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah,
remember that? Going out to around the country to different schools. There were contests they would have on Nickelodeon where they would send celebrities to people's homes if they won. We did house parties, man, in the middle of like anywhere USA, you know, because a kid won. Then during the summer, they introduced what eventually became Slime Time Live. We used to do it. It was just called Slime Time. I know everybody remembers Slime Time with Dave Asia and Vivian Collins and some other people. But before it became a regular series, it was a thing that they did in the summertime. And they would get they would rotate hosts. Sometimes it would be me. Sometimes it would be Mark Summers. Sometimes it would be Michael Malley. But we do this thing where they would ship an AT&T video phone to a potential contestant. And if we called them, they would be live on air. They could see me. The audience could see both of us together. And we would play Slime Time Live. And it was a lot of fun. But I did some of that. And then they put together the tours. You know, the Double Dare Live Tour was a big hit. So then they created the Nickelodeon Live Tour, which was a combination of several different shows. We did stuff from Wild and Crazy Kids. We did stuff from What Would You Do? We did stuff from Guts, and we did stuff from Nick Arcade at arenas. I mean, like I played anywhere a major basketball team plays, that's where we performed. I mean, I actually performed back home in Baltimore at the Baltimore Civic Center, 22,000 screaming kids. Michael Malley and I played Madison Square Garden, dude. Like, you know, there's nothing else on my bucket list, man. We did Madison Square Garden with 26,000 screaming kids running around, grabbing them out of the audience, getting families up on stage, and just having fun together, man. And then, but after all of that, that's when Figure It Out got picked up. And hey, this is another little tidbit for you. You know, on Figure It Out, they would have these kids come out to give you clues. They were called the Charade Brigade. Remember that?
Yeah, okay. I remember that.
All right, so there was one little chubby cheek African-American kid on there, and that was my son.
Oh, wow. Okay. So he was on the show. Okay.
He was on the show. So it was kind of fun because it got to the point where we would get up in the morning and we'd get, if it was, because I did, you know, I would be on not every episode. I would be on, you know, a select bunch. I think I did like 25 or there were days or weeks when I would wake up in the morning and we'd get dressed to work like, you know, two grown men, and we'd go to the studio together, father and son. He was doing his thing on Figure It Out, and I was part of the panelist. So those were really fun, unique times. I mean, man, it was, like I said, that era, man, like I said, they just took care of you, man. And it was something that I'll never forget and really appreciate it. And the other thing that helps you do is that helps you cultivate what it is that you do. Yeah. Because the very first show that I ever did in my life was Nick Arcade. And the very last show that I did for Nickelodeon was called You're On. And by the time I got to doing You're On in 1999, I went from being this kind of nervous guy who could not remember points, puzzles, pop quizzes, and prizes to save my life, who called the guy Dr. Roboneck. I went from being that guy to this dude who could sit down and like talk to camera A, camera B, have fun with the moms and the dads, high five the kids, go to a commercial and not break a sweat. You know, it was like I knew what I was doing because the network gave me opportunities, many opportunities. Like I said, big helps. Snick, remember Snick? Saturday Night Nick? Where, you'd be watching all of the shows and in between the shows, somebody like me or Mike O'Malley or Kirk Fogg or Mark Summers or Melissa Joan Hart or, whoever would pop in and we'd be talking in between the, various shows. Man, that kind of stuff was just the best. So they always just kept you working. I did a decade with them before they finally shut down the studios and everything, went away in Orlando. But while they were there up and running, man, they kept, they kept that rotating group of people in there doing stuff or out doing stuff,
And also, I wanted to point out, I didn't realize that you were in the very first episode of all that too.
I did the pilot of all that. Yeah, it's just funny. The format changed a little bit. The way the show was originally pitched and done was not only did they have a special musical guest every episode, but they were also going to have a host, almost like Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live has a guest host. Yeah. And then they also have a musical guest. Every now and then the person is one and the same. Like on Saturday Night Live, when it's Justin Timberlake, he is the host and he's also the musical guest. But that's how all that started. So they wanted to kind of keep that format, and I think they only did that like maybe 3 episodes, and then they decided, no, let's just keep it all kids, no host, and just have a musical act every week. And so when it started out, the very first episode I was on, and I was their celebrity guest, I played myself. Wow. I did this fun little, I played this fun little scene with Katrina Johnson, where she was like the bouncer. They made it look like a nightclub, but it was really like a Chuck E. Cheese, but they had a bouncer, and if your name wasn't on the list, something's going to happen to you bad. And so in the episode, I bounced up like, hi, I'm Phil Moore. I'm on Nickelodeon. Let me in. And it was some fun little stuff we did with basically letting a 10-year-old kick my butt. But man, it was an insanely awesome time, man. Really, like lightning in a bottle, as the cliche says. But the network was just really great.
Because you mentioned like that whole decade. I mean, I grew up on Nickelodeon, and that was us religiously watching it, and it seemed like the executives, I think they were so connected with kids at the time, and they had a whole movement. Like to this day, people remember Salute Your Shorts, Nick Arcade. You say Mark Summers, I immediately think Double Dare.
Right. Yeah, man. It was interesting. It's the regular little nothing things, and I don't mean that to say that as an insult to any show, but like shows in the big scheme of things compared to like a show that was on ABC or NBC or something like that. Regular little seemingly smaller shows became iconic things to these now grown up people. Yeah. With a minimal amount of beating over the head. Like, we didn't really beat, hey, here's our show. Remember who we are. Really like us. Here we are. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. Don't forget to tweet us. Don't forget to share. We didn't have to do that. It was just, we just did our thing, and everybody started liking it and sharing it back in the day, So, it was, like I said, it was again, talking about like Me Too, what I learned from that. I was surrounded just by creative geniuses, marketing wizards, when something needed to be designed, like every single thing you saw on the show had to be drawn up, designed. The camera people, let's not go and shoot it regular. Let's do some really fun things with the camera. Let's put the camera right up Mo's nose and go, wait, it's taking the Mo. Boom, and camera's right there. Let's spin the camera around and hang it from something. They were doing like crazy things, man. They had like a vision, and it was almost like, here's what our network brand is, and here's what the heart of the network is. Now, this is your show, and this is your show. Go and do something unique that fits that brand. And everybody, like, no matter who was working on whatever show, and from that, it was like being, it's like in a pool of just creative stuff. And by the time it all got done, my time was done. I walked away with so much knowledge, because remember, Nick Arcade, I had done nothing on television before. Yeah. And so by the time my season of Nickelodeon ended, meaning, that decade I was there, I walked out of there just ready now to take over the world,
And I wanted to say, because you went from that to a very serious movie, John Singleton's Rosewood.
Yeah, man.
How was that transition? Because that is a serious movie. Dude, again, I got to give props and shout out and much respect and love to the late, great John Singleton, who I saw 3 weeks before he passed out here in LA. I was out. Wow. I literally was at a store, and I looked over and I went, John? And he went, Aaron. The Aaron was my character's name. He didn't remember my name, but he remembered the name of the character. But he came over, we shook hands, and we chatted for a little bit and everything. It was really cool seeing him, like right before he passed. So here's what's up with that. Rosewood, yeah, that's a big surprise. When I told family and friends that I was doing this movie, they thought, oh, you finally doing a comedy. I'm like, no, this is serious. Serious movie, yeah.
Serious movie. I mean, for those who don't know, haven't heard of it, I mean, you can Google anything these days, but it is the true story about a massacre that happened to a well-off township in Florida, the city of Rosewood, Florida, in the year it's either 1910 or 1901. I'm remembering dyslexically, but it's either 1901 or 1910. But it's a true story. I mean, I actually got to meet the ancestors of the various characters that we were playing. I got to meet the widow. I got to meet the widow of the character I was playing. That was insane. Oh, that was heavy. That was like, go sit in your trailer and cry for like an hour. you know. But the thing with that was, I'd done this Nickelodeon stuff, and I was trying to figure out what to do next. I just signed with an agent out in Los Angeles. The very next major TV show that I did was actually hosting a dog show for Animal Planet in the year 2000. But this was right before that happened. And so I was in this period of like, what do I want to do next? Nickelodeon is going away. And all I've ever really done career-wise was just them, So it was kind of like, despite my resume, only one place knew my resume. So all of a sudden, I had to start adulting. I'm like, okay, I got to sort of market myself. Despite the fact that everybody knows my face on TV, when it's time to go get that next job, the executives at these various studios, they don't know who I am. They're not watching Nickelodeon, Yeah. So I was going through this weird thing of like, what to do. And so my agent called, and she said, well, like, I'd done like a couple of little commercials. When I say little commercials, I mean like local. No, they became national. They were like, I did like a SeaWorld commercial. I'd done a commercial for the Yellow Pages. Just stuff to keep money coming in. You get residuals, and residuals are the gift that keep on giving. Huh? Giving. You do it one day, right? You do it one. But I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and all I'd ever done was stand-up comedy and hosting for kids, which is comedy also, Yeah. And so my agent called. She said, they're shooting this movie. She told me all about it. She goes, but it's totally out of like your normal thing. But Phil, you said you're trying to figure out what you want to do next. Maybe you should try something different to see if that is something you might want to do. And so that's how that whole thing came about. But getting it, it's just an audition. I think the thing that I'm not a great actor at all. What I am is I'm a good imitator. Like I can mimic people. If I'm around, if I got friends where if we at a party and I'll start doing their voice to tell an exaggerated story about them. I've called my buddies' wives and they don't know that they're talking to me. But at that time, my ex-wife was from Daytona Beach, Florida, and all of her relatives were Southern. And this movie is about a story that took place in the early 1900s, and everybody had that heavy Southern drawl. And just like I said before, I could imitate people. So I literally went to audition, and every word I read off of the page when I auditioned and did the subsequent callbacks was just doing an impression of one of my nephews. Like, that's it. Like, I had his speech pattern down. I did the way he talks and, how he would, like, say certain words and, like, make him go longer, So I wasn't really acting. I was just doing an imitation of my nephew.
Wow.
But I could do it, but I could do it consistently. That's the thing. Like, it's one thing to be able to do Jack Nicholson and go, oh, but you can't, like, have a whole paragraph sentence. You know what I mean? So the idea was, like, I was able to sustain it, and I was able to mimic him for pages and pages worth of stuff. And, in the eyes of everybody involved, that was great acting. I'm like, all right, cool. So I could, I did it well enough for them to give me the part. But man, I gotta tell you, dude, as you can see, Phil Moore is not an actor, because that right there was probably some of the most gut-wrenching, soul-scraping work I'd ever done. I would come home every night just depressed, because it was a true story. So it was more than just acting. First of all, not being an actor, there was no getting into character for me. I was just doing an imitation of my nephew. But then you go to the set, and like the people who survived this massacre were there. Their spouses, their relatives, their children were there. They're all looking at you. I can tell you a word, something that cut me to the core. No joke. They introduced me to the beautiful woman that was my character's widow. She was 90 years old, skin like leather. I remember her touch. Her fingers felt like beef jerky in my hand. That's the kind of hard life that she had lived. But she grabbed my hand and she said, you're playing my AC. My character's name was Aaron Carrier. And she said, you're playing my AC. And I'm like, yes, ma'am, I am. And she said, well, you look kind of like him. I'm like, everybody sort of giggled. But then she looked me straight in the face, man. And she said, and she pulled my hand close and said, now you do right by him, because they done did him wrong.
Wow, that's deep. That's
dude,
deep.
Man, that's So I went to work every day, but every day it didn't feel like work. Every day I felt like I was paying justice. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so it was kind of like my only real acting experience said, that's too much for me, man.
I remember I watched that movie. I was at the time going to Navy Air Traffic Control School in Pensacola, Florida. And I remember one of my friends, man, the next day we saw the movie, and he's sitting there in the middle of the class, and he's like, man, they killed Esther Rose, man. He's like, I'm done. Oh, man.
Dude, I remember I was at, man, I was when I came up there, because this is spoiler alert in case somebody wants to see a movie that's 20 years old now, but the whole thing pops off with this other town going over to destroy the black town, because my character, for reasons that are explained in the movie, sort of helps a person who had committed a crime get to safety. And so I'm in the store, buying some stuff. And this woman comes up to me, you were in that movie Rosewood, weren't you? I'm like, yes, I was. She goes, it's all your fault, boy. I'm like, oh my God. She pointed her finger, she waving it in my face and everything. Talking at me all fast and southern. You know, when a southern person cuss you out, you've been cussed out. You know?
Oh, yes, you have. Hey, Phil, but as with all my great interviews, man, we got like 5 minutes. I wanted to talk future, man. I know you're working on a project. Where can people find you now? And again, thank you for your time. This is like self-promotion time, the last 5 minutes.
Listen, man, this is I'm very fortunate, very blessed, man, the circle of life here. I'm actually back producing a show for Nickelodeon. For those of you who have kids now, there's a show on Nickelodeon called Ryan's Mystery Playdate. It's based off of the YouTube sensation Ryan and his family from Ryan's Toy Review. We just wrapped season 3. So I've been doing this for a minute. We wrapped season 3 on March the 13th. And it's been a blast being back. Right before jumping on to Ryan, I was also producing another show for Nickelodeon, a show created by Nick Cannon called Drop That Seat. So it was interesting, man. Like all of a sudden I'm back home again, and now I'm making stuff for the next generation. So that's what I just kind of finished up. The new thing, the future. So when all craziness happened in the world, on March the 16th, I just started working as a senior producer for a new show, which is a partnership between Amazon Prime and Twitch. Ladies and gentlemen, Phil Moore is back in the video game shows. There's a show there's a show coming up called Chasing the Crown. Get the name right, Phil. It's a show coming up called Chasing the Crown. It's going to be across both Amazon and Twitch platforms. Right now, we are in pre-production, and I'm working from home. So basically, we're all doing video conference calling. We're coming up with new ideas and games and stuff like that. And, you know, we're getting to that point right now where all we can do in pre-production is sort of coming to a halt because, you know, once we get to a certain point, then it's time to go into the studio. And as you know, we ain't going nowhere right now.
Not right now.
Not right now. And so, and on that note, man, I do want to encourage everybody to be smart. You know, be smart, wash your hands, stay safe. Everybody do what you need to do. Big props out to the healthcare workers, the medical people, and then the people just working at the grocery stores and at the restaurants so we can eat, get our stuff, and get better. Big props to all of them, man, because they're on the front line, you know. But that's what's going on with me right now, man. I'm in the midst of putting together a new show, Amazon Prime and Twitch, Chasing the Crown. If we could ever get into the studio and shoot this bad boy, it'll be epic.
It'll be epic. I mean, there's a time, man. Eventually, this too shall pass. But,
exactly will.
1 minute left. Hey, Phil. Thank you for being on the show, the history. You took me back to the 90s. And thank you for sharing the history. And I look forward to your projects. And, man, again, thank you for taking time for another great interview to share your story.
Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate your audience. Everybody be safe. And, hey, Mark, keep doing what you do, brother.
Oh, thank you. And, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here with special guest Phil Moore on Deeper Than Music Radio.
Deeper than music. The core of you, the fans, the truth is deeper than music. Deeper than music. Simply the truth is the latest, the newest. It's deeper than music. Deeper than music. The core of you, the fans, the truth is deeper than music. Deeper than music. Simply the truth is the latest, the newest. It's deeper than music. Deeper than